Welcome to the Octopod. I'm Kyle Davies, head of the Office of the CTO. Join us as we dive into the latest technologies and trends shaping business. Whether you're a tech enthusiast, a business leader, or just looking to stay ahead in the digital age, this podcast is for you. Let's unlock opportunities with technology together. Let's jump in. Welcome, everybody. Today, we're going to be diving into unlocking the enterprise digital experience. I'm joined by Jaro Tomik and Tim Russell from the Office of the CTO. So what we're going to give you in this session is ideas and approaches you can use to create seamless, intuitive, and effective digital touchpoints that drive satisfaction and productivity within your organization. So if we think about the title for today, it's Enterprise Digital Experience. It sounds a bit wishy-washy, right? But realistically, what it means to most people is breaking down silos and driving productivity and satisfaction at a super high level. And we're going to dive into that. So before we get any further into this, it might be worth, Jaro, just giving everyone a bit of a level set on what enterprise service management is, because this whole enterprise digital experience kind of wraps around that, right?
Yeah, 100%. Enterprise service management is a very interesting area because it's not new, but it's evolved massively over the years. What we have seen is originally the idea of taking all of the IT best practices and applying them across different departments across the organization. Think HR, legal, facilities, and ultimately forcing them down the path that IT believed was the best. However, recently, that's not really anymore what enterprise service management is or is understood across the industry. It's much more around how can the technology team support these departments in doing their work in the best way possible and how they can deliver the most value to the business. And this is extremely apparent in cases such as joiners, movers, leavers, where you have somebody in the organization trying to recruit ultimately a new employee, for example, and it touches across many departments, whether that means IT providing a laptop, mobile phone, and access to software, HR providing all the relevant documentation, sign up on the system, and finance ensuring that they get paid when they're supposed to get paid. And ultimately, for all of this to happen, you are looking at multiple touch points, multiple people, and often massive silos across these organizations, and things are just not getting done on time. And then by that time that the person needs to start in the organization, they are simply not able to be productive from day one. And what enterprise service management is about the technology teams enabling that workflow automation cross-departmentally so that we cut out all the unnecessary noise and the silos, and we enable those seamless workflows.
Hey, I just want to touch on something you said about that, Jaro, and it's really interesting. A lot of the conversations I'm seeing, I've been in IT for a hell of a long time, more years than I care to remember. And you're right. Historically, it was IT-driven IT. And the number of conversations I have now where that's split, and I'm talking to HR, I'm talking to facilities, and all of their reasons to talk to me is not because they've got a problem with IT, it's because they want to reach another outcome. They want to reach something that they're seeing as a problem within their organization. And I'm finding very much a disconnection from IT to outcomes. IT just becomes this thing that happens in the background, but what we want to do is X. We want to make this better. We want to make that better. Talent attraction and retention, for example. There's very much a conversation that comes from HR. But HR would never turn around to me and say, we need to give people different laptops. No, what they say to me is the problem, we have this experience that is substandard. We need to build that up. And I think where I find the fun in this a lot of the time is actually talking to those two different areas of a business and exactly what you're doing, tying this together to a common experience.
Yeah, and you're right. This is exactly what I'm seeing as well. And it's very interesting that at the end of the day, the interest of IT and HR and facilities is ultimately the same. It's to support the business and deliver that business value. But they're all using different language for it. And this is where I'm still seeing the silo. They're talking ultimately about the same thing, which is things like talent retention. But they're talking at it from very different perspective. The IT believes if we provide people with the right tools, laptops, phones, at the right level, we will be secure and the employees will be happier and they're more likely to stay in the business. HR might believe that if we provide them with the right level of services and benefits, and they're also more likely to stay. So we're still talking about talent retention. So a lot of the conversations that I'm having with technology leaders is actually around the overall business objectives, the overall business value you need to deliver. So talent attraction and retention, cost optimization, risk reduction, and resilience. That really is kind of the key topics that we end up talking about, because that language is the same across all of the enterprise departments. They're trying to deliver that experience.
So I think that gives us a good rounded view of ESM and how we need to take it a level to the business outcome level kind of language rather than the technology language. But how can organizations leverage enterprise service management to break down those silos between departments, right, and foster that greater collaboration efficiency? Because it's not easy.
Yeah, it's everything but easy, and language is just one of those challenges. Another challenge that we come across quite often, and yesterday I was at a university meetup, and this is exactly what we were discussing, which is around, okay, so you want to deploy an enterprise service technology that works across multiple departments. Who is going to pay for it? And how much does each department need to contribute? And when you're at a council, when you're in a healthcare organization, university, or even an enterprise business, politics gets into it, right? Everybody wants to, work out the best way for this project to deliver the most value to their department and for them to pay the least. And this is where everything gets slowed down massively. And what we're seeing is where it truly works is where it kind of comes from above. It's the CEO, it's the CFO, it's the CIO level of saying, this is happening. This is how we're going to do it. This is how we're going to get it rolled out. Getting everybody's buy-in, which might be the tougher part. But when they do, they need to be clear objectives on how we're going to actually deliver this enterprise service management. And for that, you need clear strategy, link to the values, and have the departmental leaders on your side. And this is where I'm seeing success in the market.
Yeah, I think just to kind of expand on that, right, as well, is to break down those silos is fundamentally to actually understand what each other do, right? Because until you know what the value of each department does and people can get behind that, it kind of becomes, well, I'm more important than your requirement, and it becomes a bit of a nightmare, right, when you start doing those Moscow ratings against the requirements you need within your tooling and processes. So what kind of strategies have you seen people implement, Jaro, that has kind of extended what we used to do in the ITSM kind of world, like the ITIL frameworks and things like that, into ESM and maintaining that flexibility for non-technical teams? Is there anything that you've seen there that's worth kind of bringing up?
Yeah, I think it all comes down ultimately to, one, obviously linking it to the business value, but the second part is around how do we ensure that when anything gets rolled out, everybody's properly informed. And I think the communication is one of the things that is really, really still hindering progress, where you might be working as an IT team on part of a transformation, HR is working on another one, and facilities are doing their own thing, and it's still not properly linked. So another piece of kind of success that I've seen is creating something like a center of excellence, or creating a transformational department that helps to link up all of the different communication channels and ultimately inform of the value. And then the second part is not just between the stakeholders that are involved directly in the transformation, but also speaking to the end users. And one of the big gaps that I'm seeing is the department leaders are dictating what is going to be done, in what priority order, and how it's going to be done. And more often than not, without speaking to the end user audience that they're actually trying to build these projects for. And that seems, it's a standard in the industry. Nobody really raises an eyebrow. But if you were an outsider and looked at this, if you came from Mars and looked at this, you would be thinking, this is complete nonsense. Why are you building something for somebody and you are the person that is supposed to know best what they actually need and require? So the huge shift that I'm seeing recently in the industry is much more focused on speaking to the end users that actually are supposed to benefit from those transformational projects, and looking at their sentiment of what they're seeing as challenges, what they're seeing as positive progress, what they're seeing as good and bad performance, and gathering all of that data. And that data, when sufficiently well processed, can then be used towards correct prioritization or optimized prioritization of the project that we're looking to implement. And this is where the true enterprise service management rollout can happen and help deliver that digital experience, because we're doing things that are actually meaningful to the end user audience that we're trying to serve.
You touched on something there that kind of, I'm going to use the word triggered me a little bit. Because my background in workspace and dealing with end users and getting sentiment on how people would like to work versus the way that's maybe being forced upon them. And now that's what Tim does within our organization, right? But one of the things that's really common is making sure that because everyone believes they're in a democracy when they're in an organization, right? Everyone's got a voice, every voice is equal and everything else. And realistically, that is true to an extent. You have a voice to help shape. But the decisions are made by a smaller minority up the chain in a lot of cases. So it's great getting all this feedback, getting all this information, the sentiment and the belief that people want to get behind. But it all comes down to solid leadership and bringing people on a journey and influencing change and having change agents, right? Because realistically, if you went and canvassed 10, 20, 30, 40% of your organization and got the feedback, what I've seen by doing that, actually speaking to a much smaller subset has given you most of the information you need anyway, apart from it makes people feel involved in making the decision. Right, so it's great to canvas and get the ideas, but you've got to kind of be mindful of how long that can take, and then also how do you manage the situation where you don't address a challenge or a sentiment that's given through the process. Because everyone always looks at it from a ground level perspective around, well, what does this mean to me? Not necessarily what does it mean to the business or to my department, right? So they're the kind of things that people just need to be mindful of when we're doing that kind of analysis. But it's definitely worth doing, because that influencing, bringing people on a journey is critical to success on any project, but even more so when you're breaking down the barriers between departments. Tim, you got something to add there?
Yeah, I want to use a story. This is not anecdotal. This is not made up. This is a story I know of where, the expectations need to be managed just as well. And there was an organization that was moving into a new building, and they were looking at the desktop and they said, let's go and ask the users if they want the two 20-inch screens or a single 34-inch screen. And so they did that. Now, if you're listening to this, you're thinking, yeah, that's the right thing to do. Let's ask the users. And the users unanimously said, we want dual screens. And then I spoke to a couple of users in this organization. I said, so why did you choose dual screen? They said, oh, because I can dock my windows, one in my left screen, one in my right screen. So, but you can do that in a big screen. You can even better, you can do it 4 ways and it's automatic. And they were like, oh, I didn't know that. So my message on this is ask the users to make sure they are informed enough to make that decision. Going back to what Carl was saying, is the decisions are made in a small group, and we can assume in, I wouldn't say our ivory towers, but our level of education, particularly around technology subjects, we think we know what we're asking in a good question. But make sure that the users actually understand the question as well as we would like them to.
Yeah, and I would say this all links together. And I've previously mentioned, right, that whole leadership, and you need that sponsorship from above. You need to have the information from the end users as well. But they're all pieces of the bigger puzzle that you need to put together. And still, what we're seeing in the industry is just having only a couple of slices of that pizza puzzle, and then not really having the other ones. And that's where then the discontent happens, and potentially not the full realization of the business value.
So I've got another top tip, right? Through experience of driving change as an influencer, so a consultant ultimately going in to drive change in an organization. And that is, choose the hardest group of people first. Right? Every project that I see, we've chose the easiest department first because we want to ease it in and test and blah, blah, blah. Get your testing done, that's fine. Then choose the hardest group of individuals to please. Because if you can please them, everyone else is on board, right, at that point. Otherwise, you get to 60%, 70% of the way through your transformation, and then you actually hit this roadblock that actually may take you on a completely different journey to what you started out on, because the requirements weren't gathered properly and the right sentiment was reviewed. And the kind of story behind that from my perspective was I was many years ago doing a VDI project, virtual desktop infrastructure deployment, for a large organization. And I asked that question, who's the most challenging user you have in your business? Right? And they were like, oh, it's this person in this department. And I was like, oh, right, okay, cool. I would like to migrate that person first. And they're like, oh, no, that's a bad idea. I was like, well, no, because either we believe this solution's going to work or it's not, right? And we went into that department. We migrated this person from a big tower PC that was on their desk to a thin client with a virtual desktop infrastructure, providing a similar look and feel of than a new operating system and everything else. But other than that, it was exactly the same. And we had this individual on there for a little while, and it was going very well and very quiet. And I was thinking, oh, this is going really well. I'm really happy we've done this. And then it all started going wrong. And complaint after complaint, and after it's slow, it's this, it's that, and it's other. I'm thinking, well, you're the only person on the entire platform at the minute. So why is this the case? And when we started speaking to this individual, what we actually realised was the platform was fine, but what that person used to have on their desk was a tower PC, and on the side of that tower PC was a picture of their children stuck to the side of the tower PC. And they now had nowhere to put it. So, what we then realistically went to a local shop nearby and bought a really cheap frame and put this picture in a frame for this person, put it on their desk, never had a single complaint for the rest of the project. And if anything, they became our change agent and champion for the entire deployment. So that when someone stood up and went, this is rubbish, it's not working, they stood up and went, whoa, this is brilliant, what are you on about? Let me have a look at it. And they became our kind of person on the ground fixing the problems for us, or at least smoothing over the cracks where there were potentially issues. So again, when we think about driving change and how we're going to break down silos, because this was an IT project that was being forced upon multiple departments, so this was into the finance department in that example, it's very easy to get people on board if we do it in the right way. Tim, did you want to add something as well?
I was just going to say, it's just, you touched on it earlier on, it's this feeling of inclusion and choice. Yeah, if you're given the choice between a rucksack or a satchel, you feel like you've been given a choice and you're included. And I think for many, many years, we've seen employee experiences, how quick is the app you're trying to launch, not what's the environment like you're operating in. And it's not just a digital environment, as you rightly pointed out there, Carl. It is the entire point of experience from your first day to your last day, from the start of a Monday to the end of a Friday. And a lot of this we can digitally measure, connect, collect, and understand. So it's absolutely critical to understand the big picture.
Yeah, but don't forget this human sentiment that comes in an emotion, right? That's the key thing there. So taking it up a notch, Jaro, in enterprise service management, what role does automation play in optimizing those workflows across those business functions? Because if we're trying to break down the silos, make everyone's lives easier, and kind of take this framework on board, what should people be looking to potentially automate first, right? And how should they look to integrate automation into that kind of approach they take?
Yeah, I mean, I could go with your advice and say pick the most difficult department and try to automate them first, but their workflows first. But no, generally speaking, I would say that what's really changed recently is the technology, really, the availability of the tools that we now have to automate things, automate at scale, and also have the systems tell us where we should be automating, suggesting to us the workflows that have been used over and over again and are not yet automated, and ultimately providing that feedback back to the business analysts and to people behind who are responsible for the workflows and for the processes, and enabling them to not only put these workflows into practice, but also to see how well they're performing. Are they being used? When they're being used, is that actually successful? Is it not? And that data then enables us to truly verify that the business value is being delivered. So that would be the biggest kind of shift in terms of the automation across the different departments. It all starts with integration. So either you need to have things on the same platform, let's say all your services on a single platform, but that's fairly unusual. I mean, you might have, let's say, HR and you might have IT and maybe facilities on the same platform, but you will still end up with other departments using their specialist tools to perform their tasks. So at the end of the day, you will have to do quite a lot of integration, and that interoperability, I would say, is the first step that you typically need to take to enable that data flow so that you have a visibility of where things are moving, how long they're there, how long they're being stuck in various places, who is responsible for those individual tasks, so that you have an understanding of where you are and what you need to improve. So that would be the very first step. And then the second step is, as you're automating, make sure that you are looking at the cross-departmental workflows and you have a way to monitor it again, so you can see the performance. And of course, monitor the experience throughout of the agents in those different departments, as well as of the end users receiving the service, because that then helps you calculate the return on investment. You will get the amount of time saved, which you can multiply by the average wage of that worker. It also gives you the idea of, okay, if our employees are now happier, they are hopefully more secure, like you guys have mentioned on one of the previous podcasts, right? They're doing less silly things in terms of security, less tired and so forth. But also they are just more productive, more than anything else, and less likely to leave the organization. And that then constitutes the return on investment from all those projects, with which you can then, as a technology leader, justify further projects and driving the organization forward.
And I think one of the most common ones that we see as a request is, can you come and help me automate my JML processes, right? We kind of touched on it earlier. So JML being joiners, movers, levers for anyone that doesn't know the acronym. But the thing there is that because of those diverse tool sets, and it is very uncommon that a lot of departments on the same platform, right? The amount of time we go into a business where they've got Workday doing HR activities, they've got Sage Payroll doing something for the finance department, you've got IT running ServiceNow or some equivalent ITSM tooling, and then you've got whatever, right? So thinking about how the accounts get generated, how it then orders equipment into your procurement platform off to your third-party value-added reseller that's going to then sell you that equipment potentially and get it off the warehouse and configure it and all that kind of stuff. All these touch points becomes an integration point, as you mentioned. And I think what people need to think about there is no matter how big your organization is or how small, getting it right from the very beginning is critical. Right? There's a customer I was speaking to the other week where they said, well, we don't need to automate our JML because we're only 250 users in size. I was like, okay, cool. What's your growth aspirations? Where are you trying to get to as a business? Oh, we are anticipating acquiring a business and then being around 1,000 users within the next 2 years. And I'm like, well, get your framework in now whilst it's easier in inverted commas, right? Because you have a smaller business, a little bit more agile potentially than a large enterprise, and get it in, get it embedded, get it working. And then when you do that M&A activity, it slots nicely into your framework so you can bring them into your business's way of working and framework. So that's just, again, a bit of a tip from me when you're thinking about automation around that joiners, movers, levers process. And it's okay if you don't automate all of it, right? If you can at least automate 50, 60% of it initially, that's still 50, 60% saving and consistency, which then, to your point, Jaro, then drives security benefits where things are being done consistently across your business. So just think about those at a super high level. Now, one of the things that I know me and you, Jaro, have talked about previously was that the SLAs are no longer really enough. And this is where in enterprise service management, it kind of broadens that kind of SLA conversation to a different approach. But what kind of key metrics and KPIs should people listening to the podcast look to track and measure across their enterprise service management initiatives?
SLAs is a very interesting one. I mean, we've been relying traditionally in technology on SLAs for a very long time. By the way, the average time during which the SLA remains unchanged, so let's say 24 hours to resolve an incident, 5 hours to respond or something like that, is 20 years, as done by a study, right? So for 20 years, these things seem to be unchanged. Yet what happened in the last 20 years? None of us had mobile, as in smartphones 20 years ago. So, the technology is changing massively, but these things are often fairly static. And it's the basic measurement of how, whether the IT department is delivering value back to the business. However, what we have found over time is, on its own, that's not good enough metric, because it is still IT ultimately marking their own homework, and it does not provide a holistic view of the quality of the service. So whether you look at managed service providers or whether you look at internal departments, giving somebody an information, providing back to the CFO, if you're providing information that we have achieved 99.99% availability, that sounds great. That sounds amazing, right? and everybody would give you thumbs up. But if you're a trading organization and that 0.01% falls on your key trading period and means losses of millions of pounds, well, nobody's going to clap you for that. Whilst if it's on a Sunday when nothing happens, nobody really cares. And that's the bit that we're really missing out on. And it's called, I think it was Barclay Ray who coined the term watermelon effect. Everything seems green on the outside, but in fact, the end users on the inside are raging. It's all red because for them, it's that 0.01% unavailability of the software, for example, or it's maybe that they waited 7 hours for somebody to send them back an email as a response that they are working on it, but not actually getting a resolution. And that's simply not good enough anymore. And that's why in the industry, what we're seeing is a shift towards what we call XLA, experience level agreements. The name is slightly misleading because they're not actual static agreements that stay there for 20 years, but more a part of a continual improvement where what you do is you gather data in terms of what the sentiment of your end users is right now, what is the performance of the various devices, you set sort of a benchmark of where we are right now, and then you set an aspirational target for the next 3 to 6 months, and you continually review those and update those because they will inevitably be affected by things like CrowdStrike, by things like COVID, by things like laptop refreshes. And that's why you need to understand how your experience is affected, why it's affected that way, and adjust your experience levels accordingly. And this applies even across countries because for the same service delivery in Germany, they will give you lower marks for the same service that in comparison to, let's say, the UK or US, where they traditionally will give you much higher marks, right? And just having that understanding, having the global data and access to it, so that you can compare yourself to other businesses in the same vertical is really key. So getting that XLA then turns the whole thing from a watermelon into what we call a kiwi, right? It's green on the outside and inside, and we can actually measure that more objectively.
I'm definitely getting hungry with these analogies of fruit. I have to be honest. I was just going to touch on something there. And you say about the XLA, and I was just going to visualize this because I see a lot in customer experience and employee experience is about if I send an email to someone and I get an auto response, to them they've ticked an SLA box is we responded within 20 minutes. What value did I have on that response other than knowing I sent it to the right email address? And I'm seeing a lot of this in both customer and employee experiences. The responses are no longer there to tick an SLA. They're actually to try and give you help to resolve the issue you're having. And we haven't used it yet today, but I'm going to say AI. I know you said robotics, RPA, automation, but I'm going to use the AI word, and I'm pretty sure you got your head in your hands right now. As, oh my goodness, somebody said AI. But the way of saying that SLA isn't just about sending you a response in 5 minutes. Our XLA is to provide you the opportunity to hopefully fix this problem before you even need to talk to one of our agents. Yeah, we want to find this level of experience as a user. None of us like to hear this. You're really important to us, but we're sorry, we're going to put you in hold. It has no value. We want to turn that around to a real outcome-based experience.
And I'm seeing a huge shift in the industry in terms of traditionally we've been talking about being reactive and going into being proactive. Now, what I'm seeing is with this AI, since you've opened up the topic now, what I'm seeing is a shift from even organizations that feel fairly immature, going almost like skipping the proactive part and going into predictive, utilizing the data they have at their disposal, even if it's not perfect, to start seeing patterns and clustering those different events and alerts, and ultimately understanding much better what's happening across their environments. And that then, once they teach those models, and we're talking nowadays months, not years, to teach those models, once they have that done, they are able to predict based on all the different metrics across the network that something is going to impact the end users. And therefore, they're able, before the end user even notices anything, to fix things. And that's incredible. And we also know, just to add some statistic in here, that 85% of incidents are still caused by change. And these systems are able, when a change happens, immediately spot what sort of a wave of disasters this has caused, revert the change, and create yet another ticket. But this time, without the end users really noticing, preventing all of that negative impact and sending it back to QA, back to dev to actually be reworked because it's broken the network. And I think this is a huge shift that's happening in the industry where we're leveraging the technology to deliver a much better experience. Because if we don't do this, then we're always on the back foot, seeing the end users having to report the incidents to us so that we can fix them. So really what we're aiming towards is that zero ticket future, right? That doesn't mean that there will be no tickets, but what that means is from the end user perspective, they might not even ever have to raise a ticket, because ideally, in the ideal world, all of that will already be seen by IT and being worked on.
Yeah, and I think just kind of going to how experiences change, right? So you mentioned a moment ago that smartphones were around 20 years ago. So let's just put something into perspective. Does anyone remember the Nokia N-Gage phone?
Yeah.
Right? That was the first time you could actually get half-decent colour games on your phone and things like that, right? But realistically, in 2000, 2004 era, phones started going from these larger devices to smaller form factors. And then we look at ourselves now, what do we have now? Larger form factor devices. So we think about the iPhone Pro Maxes and all that kind of stuff, and the Ultra devices from Samsung or whatever it might be, your flavour of choice. But the key thing there, though, is choice. You can have a small form factor, you can have a large form factor. I want to bring that up just because that's really been a nice little thing. So at first, in my mind, it triggered Nokia 3310s and playing Snake and creating my own ringtones. But then I realised that was like 1997 or something like that. Go on.
And I thought you were going to mention the Huawei triple fold phone. That one is like an extreme example of, I remember my dad having an old Sony phone in the late 90s that was heavy and kind of, could only really call. And then later on, there were the new ones that could text. And it was incredible how small the phones got. They were actually so small, it was uncomfortable. And just the shift to them being bigger and bigger now is great, but they no longer fit into the pockets. So I've got friends now who are like, there's no way I'm going to buy the best device on the market because it simply doesn't fit into my pocket. I have to actually compromise on the performance and get something mid-sized because I have to use two hands to actually control the device, and it's just not usable anymore. So it'll be interesting to see where that's heading. I don't know, Tim, if you've got some opinion on that.
Look, this is just touching on the absolute key message. Is there are 8 billion unique people on the planet who work differently. And yet, from a company perspective, we want to give a similar experience, similar equity to everyone. How do we do that without giving a different solution to every single person? And I think that's ultimately where it comes down to, is your enterprise digital experience is about allowing that freedom of choice, that individualism that makes us, without tying a company up into knots to make a million different solutions for every different user.
Yeah, and I think I just wanted to bring that in as a bit of a comedy value thing with the smartphone analogy you used there, Jaro. But if we think about like taking that step forward around that experience management and kind of how expectations change over time, you mentioned zero ticket future, predictive, proactive. I know from the workspace arena, Tim, we have digital experience tooling that's now more prevalent than it ever has been. Now, I've been talking about this for almost 15 years. But it's only really in the last 12 to 24 months where people are actually taking it seriously and looking at implementing it into their organizations. So that might be just a good thing to kind of touch on, because realistically, 70% of an organization's cost, according to some statistics online, is based on labor cost, your people cost. So we need to make them as productive and as satisfied as we can be to get the biggest return from that person. So yeah, can we just dive into that digital experience thing a little bit around that kind of experience monitoring and what that can do for us to drive towards zero ticket futures?
Well, let's build on the stats you gave there. You might spend 70% of operational costs on staff. If you spend a not insignificant amount on attracting and training and equipping that person in the first place as well. And one of the stats I saw recently, I think it's the tail end of last year, is 47% of people would consider leaving the organization they're in because of a bad employee experience from a technology perspective. And here's the counterpoint. 50% of people don't report IT faults because they don't think they're going to get handled. So you've got half your people who want to leave because they've got a poor experience, and you've got half your people who won't report the faults. How do you even see that? And this is where I think digital employee experience really does make a difference. It's not Big Brother. And some people see it as a Big Brother tool. I see it as quite the opposite. If you have someone in your team who works 20-hour days continually, that's not a good thing. It might not be that they're bad at the job, but they're overcommitted. Digital employee experience starts looking at that. but maybe they've got a really sucky experience that their apps don't work, or they have to reboot their laptop every 5 minutes. Without digital employee experience, and I mean the digital part of this, you don't get that visibility. But also, way back when I started in technology, uptime was based on, can I ping the server? It must be your problem. Even back on 10 base 2, for those who remember it, coaxial networks, can I ping the server? Well, it must be up. That's no longer good enough. We've got people working at home, and we saw that through the last couple of years, a massive transition. Digital employee experience now, they can say to a user is, look, everything in the organization is fine, but what we notice is your Wi-Fi is a little bit sucky right now. You might want to do something. You might want to plug into the router. And what you're doing, and touching on what you were saying there earlier as well, Jaro, is you're preempting that raising of a ticket by telling the user, we've noticed something that might influence your experience. And isn't the user going to be happier with that? It's not got an overhead for an individual. It's got this tool on their desktop telling them something you're doing could be optimized. We're not telling you you're doing it wrong, but you could have a better experience. And how happy would I be if my device was telling me I was doing things in a bad way and I could maybe do them slightly better?
The difficulty I see is that you then might start gathering all of that data, but if you don't have somebody or something processing all of that data, whether that's quantitative or qualitative, what you end up with is extra work. And because everybody's busy, and this might not be seen as a priority by the organization, what you end up with is just really nothing gets done, nothing gets actioned. And this is where we've seen, and I know we've discussed this multiple times this year, we've seen technologies coming up in the market which are actually able to take all of that workload off your hands, process it, and provide you with the results and even suggestions of improvements that you need to make. And that I find quite exciting, because the main blocker, Kyle was talking about this for 15 years, right? But it was always dependent on somebody actually being responsible, accountable, paid for processing the data. This is now changing. Now it will be done pretty much automatically in the background, and you will just need people to look at the outputs of the data so that they can start looking at what sort of outcomes as part of our improvement projects will be delivering. And that really is, for me, the truly exciting part, that we can leverage the data to make this enterprise experience better.
And I think that's where the whole concept of self-healing kind of comes into play, and really using the technology to narrow that funnel of view to give an agent to the right information to go in and act and do something, right? So it's going to be really interesting to see how this plays out over the next 12 to 18 months as these things even further advance. And I'll join in with the AI wording, right? Is that it also means that this will accelerate even faster than it ever has done before. Now, why have I been talking about it for the last 15 years and still talking about it now to a degree? Because it's super important. But if you don't have the right people or the right tooling that narrows that view, it becomes shelfware very quickly, and you get spammed with messages and notifications that you then ignore and do nothing with. And then it's a very poor investment at that point. So just to wrap up this kind of episode then, right? I'm going to go to Jaro, you first. Top 3 tips. So we've covered some throughout the episode, but top 3 tips with regards to driving that digital experience across an organization.
Yeah, I will cheekily borrow some of the wording from ITIL best practices. And then the step 1 there is start where you are. If you do not know where you are right now, it's really difficult to do anything and to know your baseline and to then prove to your business that what you're doing is actually working and delivering that business value. The second thing is progress iteratively with feedback. Yeah, agile may have become swear word in some organization, but the principles are great, right? And it's really key that you work with those organizations and vendors that enable you to gradually prove the concept, prove the value, so that you can be confident about the choice that you have made. And the third one is automate along the way. Hyper automation as a concept, as in, first of all, whenever you have any sort of challenge in the organization, look at the way technology can resolve it, and only then look at hiring dozens of people to solve it. Enables organizations to think automation first and reduce that manual effort from the get-go. And that then enables you to be set up for a bit more efficient, more secure future.
Absolutely. And I'm going to bounce on one of yours as well, because it's kind of the points I would make. So the first one I'm going to say is that engage the end users in the decision making, involve them, but ensure that they have the correct expectation and training to be able to make that decision. Don't assume. And also measure it once they've made a decision. Second, absolutely leverage automation. Integrate automation, be that as a tool to augment, a tool to replace, or a tool to improve. Use it where you can, because it gives so much space somewhere else. And the last one, and we touched on this towards the end of the call, was focus on digital experience monitoring. All right. And it's not just monitoring, because people get a little bit het up about the word, but focus on how you can measure and create trend around experience that ultimately leads to protecting your employee workforce, to retaining them and improving the quality of experience that they have. We all want a nice day at work. Let's try and use the digital tools we have to improve people's daily life.
Awesome. And then my 3, just to wrap it up today, is first one, explore choice, but with guardrails. The second one, then look at your current process flows and how much time is spent chasing, changing, and the manual activities that you might be able to automate. And then thirdly, don't be scared, be brave, and be successful. So on that note, I'd like to thank everyone for listening, and we'll see you on the next episode. Thanks for tuning in to today's episode. Be sure to check out the back catalogue for more great insights. Don't forget to subscribe via your favourite podcast platform so you never miss an episode. We appreciate your support, and if you have a topic you want us to cover, feel free to reach out. Catch you next time.